The sound.
It was a whisper at first, then a scream. We see a door slam shut with no one there. The temperature drops 20 degrees in seconds. We found a diary. What was written inside should have stayed buried. We went looking for a forgotten piece of history, but we found a nightmare that's still very much alive. This footage is our warning. What we saw in that desolate cabin, it's real and it's waiting. If you want to see what we caught on camera, what chased us through the woods, stick around. You won't believe your eyes. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, and let us know what city you're watching from in the comments below. The air in the Allegheny National Forest was different that day. Thicker, heavy with the kind of ancient silence that presses in on you, muffling the modern world until all you can hear is the frantic beat of your own heart. I'm Liam, and for the past 2 years, my channel has been all about chasing that silence, exploring the places people forgot. With me, as always, were Maya and Ben. Maya, the steadfast skeptic, armed with a geology degree and a rational explanation for everything. Ben, our tech guru, laden with enough electromagnetic field detectors, audio recorders, and infrared cameras to declare war on the supernatural. We called ourselves Echo Explorers. A bit cheesy, I know, but it fit. We were searching for echoes of the past. That day, we found something that echoed back. We'd been hiking for 6 hours, following a barely there trail on a crumbling 1940s topographical map. The plan was to find the ruins of an old logging camp called Hemlock's Hollow. But the forest had reclaimed everything. The trail vanished into a sea of ferns and moss-covered deadfall. "Maps useless," Maya declared, wiping sweat from her brow. The landscapes completely changed. We should head back, try a different approach tomorrow. Ben, consulting his GPS, grunted in agreement. Yeah, we're about a mile off course, and we're losing light fast. But as I scanned the dense wall of trees, I saw it. It wasn't a trail, not really. It was more like a suggestion of one, a faint parting in the undergrowth, marked by a trio of hemlocks that seemed just a little too perfectly aligned. On the bark of the middle tree was a carving, almost swallowed by time. It looked like a spiral or maybe a coiled snake. "What about that?" I said, pointing. "That's not on any map." Maya sighed, the sound of long-suffering friendship. "Liam, that's probably a game trail." Last thing we need is to get properly lost following a deer path to nowhere. Game trails don't usually have creepy symbols carved into them, Ben countered, his interest piqued. He unslung his camera and took a photo of the carving. This feels different. The debate was short. The allure of the unknown, the very thing that drove us to do this, won out. We pushed through the ferns and onto the hidden path. The change was immediate and profound. The air grew cooler. The chirping of birds and the drone of insects faded away into an unnerving stillness. The canopy overhead became so dense that the late afternoon sun was reduced to a few sickly yellow beams struggling to pierce the gloom. The path was narrow and wound deeper into a part of the forest that felt primeval, untouched. We walked in single file, our voices unnaturally loud in the quiet. After what felt like an hour, as the shadows began to stretch and devour the last of the light, we saw it. Through a break in the gnarled trees, a structure stood against the bruised twilight sky. It was a cabin fashioned from dark, hand-hewn logs, the roof sagging under the weight of a century of moss. A single stone chimney stood crooked and defiant on one end. It wasn't on our map. It wasn't on any map. It looked like it had been there forever, a natural outgrowth of the forest itself, waiting patiently in the silence. "No way!" Ben whispered, his tech-focused mind momentarily silenced by awe. "It's perfectly preserved." Maya was less impressed, her skepticism a familiar shield. "It's a hunter's cabin, probably illegal." Let's not get too excited. But there were no signs of modern use. No beer cans, no plastic wrappers, no fresh tracks. The place felt sealed off from time. As we drew closer, the feeling of unease that had been a low hum in the back of my mind grew into a palpable dread. The cabin had 2 windows on the front, like vacant eyes, and a single plank door that was slightly ajar. It was an invitation and a warning all at once. The sun had dipped below the horizon now, and the forest was plunging into a deep, starless darkness. A cold wind rustled the leaves, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. "We can't make it back to the car before dark," I said, stating the obvious. "We should stay here. Take shelter for the night." Ben was already nodding, his explorer instincts overriding his caution. "We can set up the gear, do a preliminary sweep. This could be the find of the year." Maya folded her arms, her gaze fixed on the dark doorway. "I don't like this, Liam. This place feels wrong." She was right. It did feel wrong. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn back, to run into the dark woods rather than cross that threshold. But the alternative was a night spent in the open, and the cabin, for all its foreboding presence, offered 4 walls and a roof. "Just for the night," I promised, my voice sounding braver than I felt. "We'll be safe inside." What's the worst that could happen? It was a stupid question, the kind people in horror movies always ask. As we stepped onto the creaking porch, the door swung inward with a low groan, revealing the pitch-black interior. The woods behind us were completely silent, as if holding their breath, waiting to see what we would do next. The air that spilled from the cabin's dark maw was stale and cold, a cocktail of dust, rotting wood, and something else, something faintly metallic and unsettling, like old blood. Ben clicked on his headlamp, and a powerful beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a scene frozen in time. The single room was larger than it appeared from the outside. A thick blanket of dust covered everything, so fine and undisturbed, it looked like a layer of gray snow. In the center of the room sat a crude wooden table, flanked by 3 mismatched chairs, one of which was tipped over on its side as if its occupant had left in a hurry. To the right, a massive stone hearth dominated the wall, its mouth choked with blackened, ancient-looking logs. A rusted iron poker lay on the hearthstones. To the left, a narrow, steep staircase with no handrail led up to a second-floor loft, its top disappearing into impenetrable shadow. Against the back wall were a simple cot with a shredded, straw-stuffed mattress and a small, dilapidated dresser with several drawers missing. The place was a time capsule, but the story it told was one of poverty and sudden departure. "Incredible!" Ben breathed, sweeping his light across the room. "Look at the construction. Dovetail joints on the logs. This place has to be from the late 1800s, maybe earlier." He unzipped his pack and began methodically laying out his equipment on the dusty table: a digital audio recorder, 3 night vision cameras, and a sleek black device with a needle gauge. "EMF meter," he explained, seeing my look. "Detects fluctuations in the electromagnetic field. If there's any kind of spiritual energy here, this should pick it up." Maya, ever the pragmatist, was less concerned with spiritual energy and more with structural integrity. She ran a hand along a wall log, her fingers coming away coated in grime. The wood's surprisingly solid. Dry rot hasn't set in too badly. She nudged the overturned chair with her boot. Still, this whole place gives me the creeps. Let's just set up our sleeping bags, get some rest, and be out of here at first light. I nodded, but my attention was snagged by the smaller details. Nailed to the wall beside the hearth was a single, hand-forged iron hook, empty. Below it, half buried in the dust and debris on the floor, was a single child's shoe. It was made of worn leather, impossibly small, with a snapped lace. I pointed it out to the others. Ben crouched down and photographed it from several angles before gently picking it up. "Wow, that's sad," he murmured, turning it over in his hand. Maya just shook her head. "Probably fell off a shelf. This place has been abandoned for 100 years, Liam." Things get left behind, but it felt different. It felt intentional, like a single, solitary clue left for us to find. While Ben began setting up his cameras, one aimed at the main room, one at the staircase, and one pointing at the front door, I decided to inspect the dresser. The remaining drawers were stiff, but I managed to pry one open with a groan of protest from the old wood. It was empty, save for a thin layer of dust and a dead moth. The second drawer, however, held something. Tucked into the back corner was a small, tarnished silver locket, oval-shaped and etched with a delicate floral pattern. My heart beat a little faster as I worked the clasp open. Inside, I expected to see a faded, sepia-toned photograph of a somber-faced woman or a child. But it was empty. Both sides were vacant, just polished, empty hollows staring back at me. A locket with no one to remember. The feeling of wrongness intensified, coiling in my gut. "Find anything?" Maya asked from across the room, where she was unrolling her sleeping bag as far from the shadowy staircase as possible. "Just an old locket," I said, closing it with a soft click and slipping it into my pocket. I didn't want to tell them it was empty. It felt like a bad omen. Ben finished his setup, placing the audio recorder on the center of the table. "Okay, everything's rolling." The EMF meter is dead quiet, which is normal. Let's see if the night changes anything. We pulled our remaining rations from our packs and sat at the table, eating protein bars and jerky in a near-complete silence, broken only by the sound of our own chewing. We didn't light a fire in the hearth. None of us wanted to risk burning the ancient structure down, and besides, the chimney was likely blocked. Instead, we relied on the cold, sterile light of our lanterns and headlamps, which cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. Every creak of the cabin's old bones made us jump. The wind outside began to pick up, whistling through the cracks in the log walls with a mournful, sighing sound. I kept glancing at the staircase, at the impenetrable darkness of the loft above. It felt heavy, like the air was denser up there, pressing down on us. My mind kept returning to the tiny leather shoe and the empty locket. These weren't just objects, they were fragments of a life, of a family. Who were they? Why did they leave these things behind? Why did they leave at all? As we prepared to settle into our sleeping bags for a restless night, Ben checked his EMF meter one last time. The needle was still, resting at 0. "Nothing," he said with a hint of disappointment. "Guess it's just an old, creepy cabin after all." But I wasn't so sure. The silence in this place wasn't empty. It was full of waiting. The transition from twilight to true night in the deep woods is a sudden and absolute thing. One moment, there is the faint, gray memory of light. and the next, a profound ink-black darkness presses against the windows, a physical presence that seems to suck the very air from your lungs. That's how it felt inside the cabin. The world outside our small circle of lantern light had ceased to exist. We were adrift in a sea of black, the cabin our tiny, fragile raft. We had arranged our sleeping bags in the center of the room, a triangle of nervous energy. Nobody was sleeping. Maya was pretending to read a book on her phone, but I could see her eyes darting towards the shadows every few seconds. Ben was hunched over his laptop, monitoring the camera feeds, his face illuminated by the screen's cold glow. I was just listening. The wind had become a character in our little drama, moaning around the eaves and rattling the window frames. It was easy to imagine voices in its constant, sorrowful cry. For the first hour, nothing happened. The cabin groaned and creaked around us, the normal sounds of an old structure settling. Maya would periodically offer a rational explanation. "That's just the wood contracting in the cold," she'd say after a particularly loud pop. "The wind is forcing air through a gap in the chinking," she'd insist after a high-pitched whistle. She was trying to convince herself as much as us. The first truly inexplicable event was the cold. It didn't creep in, it fell upon us. In the space of a minute, the temperature in the room plunged. It was a damp, penetrating cold that went straight to the bone, a cold that felt unnatural. I could see my own breath misting in the lantern light. "What the hell?" Ben muttered, pulling his jacket tighter. "It must be 30 degrees colder than it was a second ago." Maya was looking at the hearth. A downdraft from the chimney, maybe? But there was no draft. The air was perfectly, unnervingly still. The flame of our main lantern, which had been burning steadily, suddenly flickered and shrank as if starved of oxygen. And then we heard it. A single, distinct creak from the floorboards directly above our heads. We all froze, our eyes simultaneously snapping up to the dark ceiling. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. "The wood contracting," Maya whispered, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "It was one sound," Ben countered, his voice low. "It sounded like a footstep." We waited, straining our ears for what felt like an eternity. Nothing. The moment stretched, and the tension began to ebb, replaced by a jittery exhaustion. Maybe it was just the house. Maybe we were letting the creepy atmosphere get to us. Then Ben, who had been staring intently at his EMF meter, let out a sharp, choked gasp. "Guys, look." He turned the device towards us. The needle, which had been dormant at 0 all evening, was twitching violently, swinging back and forth across the gauge in erratic, angry spikes. It was a silent scream in the quiet room. As we stared at it, mesmerized, another sound came. This one was different. It wasn't a creak or a groan. It was faint, soft, and chillingly human. It was the sound of someone humming a simple melodic tune. It was directionless, seeming to come from the very walls around us, a phantom melody that was both beautiful and deeply, deeply wrong. The humming lasted for maybe 10 seconds before fading away into the oppressive silence, leaving an echo in our minds. No one spoke. The rational world had begun to fray at the edges, and we could all feel ourselves slipping into a place governed by older, darker rules. The EMF meter's needle slowly settled back to 0. The intense cold receded slightly, leaving behind a lingering chill. Did you record that?" I finally managed to ask Ben. my voice a dry croak. He nodded numbly, his eyes wide. The audio recorder has been running the whole time. It should have picked it up. He reached for his laptop to check the file, but as his fingers touched the trackpad, a new sound cut through the stillness, sharper and more violent than the others. It was a scratching sound, coming from the inside of the door to the staircase. Scrabble, scrape, scratch, like an animal trapped or a single fingernail being dragged slowly and deliberately down the old wood. Every muscle in my body went rigid. This was no longer ignorable. This wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the house settling. Something was in the cabin with us. Something was on the other side of that door. The scratching continued for a few moments and then stopped as abruptly as it began. The silence that rushed back in was heavier, more menacing than before. We were no longer just explorers, documenting a forgotten place. We were intruders, and we were not welcome. We stayed awake all night, huddled together, watching the shadows and praying for the dawn. The dawn came, not with a triumphant burst of light, but as a slow, reluctant leaking of gray into the suffocating blackness. The sight of the forest gradually resolving itself outside the grimy windows did little to dispel the terror of the night. Sleep had been impossible. Every creak, every gust of wind had sent fresh waves of adrenaline through us. The humming, the scratching, they were seared into my memory. As soon as there was enough light to navigate, we were supposed to leave. That was the plan. But the night had changed something in us, particularly in Ben and me. We couldn't just run. We had to know more. "I'm not leaving until I know what this place is," I said, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. Maya looked at me, her face pale and drawn. "Liam, we heard what we heard. Something is wrong here. We need to go. Now." "But we have evidence," Ben argued, gesturing to his equipment. "The EMF spikes, the audio, this is real. We can't just walk away from the biggest discovery of our lives." It was during this tense debate that my eyes fell upon the floor near the hearth. In my fear-addled state, I was noticing everything, every detail of the room. I saw a slight discoloration in the wood, a section of floorboards that didn't quite match the others. There was a small, circular hole in one of them, like a finger pull. My curiosity overriding my fear, I walked over and knelt down. I hooked a finger into the hole and pulled. The board came up with surprising ease, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity beneath the floor. And inside that cavity was a small, tin box, rusted shut. "What is it?" Maya asked, her apprehension momentarily replaced by intrigue. I lifted the box out. It was heavy. After a few moments of struggling with the rusted latch, I managed to pry it open. The smell of dust and dry paper filled the air. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried leaves, was a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover was blank and cracked with age. The pages were yellowed and filled with elegant but spidery cursive, written in faded brown ink. "A diary," I whispered. We gathered around the table, the morning's gray light falling on the delicate pages as I carefully opened it to the first entry. "We have completed the cabin. My Alara says it is a fortress against the wilderness, a warm heart in a cold wood. Our daughter, Sarah, delights in chasing the butterflies in the new meadow. I have felled the timber, and I have built our home with my own 2 hands. We are safe here. We are finally free." The first dozen entries were much the same, a portrait of a simple, happy life. Silas, the author, wrote of his wife Ilara's garden, of his daughter Sarah's laughter, of the beauty of the forest. But then, the tone began to shift. A chill has come to the woods, earlier than usual. It is not the normal cold of autumn. It is a deeper thing, a stillness that quiets the birds and makes the deer wary. When I am at the edge of the clearing, I feel eyes upon me from the deep woods. Ilara says it is my imagination, but the feeling persists. I flipped a few more pages. The entries became more sparse, the handwriting more agitated. December 29th, 1893. Sarah has a new friend. She calls him the Whispering Man. She says he lives in the shadows of her room and tells her stories of the cold, dark earth. Ilara and I are troubled. There is no one for miles. She is a lonely child, but this is an unhealthy fantasy. Last night, I heard her whispering back to the shadows. I could not make out the words. My own blood ran cold. The Whispering Man. The sickness has taken Ilara. It began with the whispers. She said she could hear them on the wind, calling her name. Now a fever rages in her. She grows pale and weak, and she stares at the corner of the room, her eyes wide with a fear I cannot comprehend. She speaks of a shadow that stands over her bed at night. The doctor from town cannot explain it. He calls it consumption, but I know it is something else. It is this place. The woods are poisoning us. The final entries were nearly illegible, the ink smudged as if by a trembling hand. Sarah is gone. I searched the woods until my voice was raw and my feet were bloody. I found only one of her shoes by the creek. The Whispering Man. She used to say he promised her she'd never be cold again. Ilara passed in her sleep this morning. Her last word was a name, Sarah. I am alone now. The cabin is no longer a home. It is a tomb. I turned to the very last page. There was only one sentence scrawled frantically across the paper. It is not the woods. It is the house. It took them, and now it waits for me. The shadow is in the walls. A profound silence fell over our group. The diary wasn't just a story. It was a confirmation. The humming we heard. Was it Ilara? The scratching? Sarah? The oppressive cold, the feeling of being watched. It was the shadow. Silas had called it the shadow. We looked around the cabin, no longer seeing just old logs and dust, but a place of immense tragedy and malevolence. The history wasn't dead. It was all around us, and we had just read its last will and testament. We were no longer just in a haunted house. We were in its house. Reading the diary was like throwing a switch. The vague, atmospheric dread that had permeated the cabin solidified into sharp-edged, specific terror. We weren't just dealing with a random ghost. We were in Silas's tomb, a place haunted by the grief-stricken spirits of his family and the malevolent entity that had destroyed them. The name Sarah hung in the air, a heavy, tragic weight. The child's shoe by the hearth was no longer a curious artifact. It was a heartbreaking memorial. Ben, who had been pale and silent while I read, finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. The Whispering Man, the shadow in the walls. Liam, this isn't a residual haunting. This is intelligent. It's aware of us. Maya, whose skepticism had been shattered beyond repair, was now visibly trembling. She kept her back to the wall, her eyes scanning every dark corner of the room. "Okay, that's it," she said, her voice tight with fear. "We have what we came for. History, evidence, whatever. We are leaving right now." I agreed with her completely. The desire to document and understand was being rapidly consumed by the primal urge to survive. "Pack your bags." "We're getting out of here," I commanded, my voice firm. We began to move, a frantic, clumsy ballet of stuffing sleeping bags into sacks and gathering our scattered gear. The silence of the cabin seemed to deepen, to watch our hurried preparations with a cold, ancient patience. It felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting. Ben was detaching his cameras from the walls when it happened. The door leading to the staircase, the one that had been the source of the scratching, the one we had all been studiously avoiding looking at, slammed shut with a concussive blast of sound that echoed like a gunshot. We all screamed, spinning around to face it. The heavy plank door was now firmly closed, the old iron latch audibly clicking into place. "Did the wind?" Maya started, her voice a thin thread. "There is no wind in here." "Ben!" yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "It latched itself." Panic began to set in, a cold, constricting wave. We were trapped. Or at least, the entity wanted us to feel that way. "The front door, go!" I shouted, grabbing my pack. But as we scrambled towards our only other exit, Ben held up a hand, his face a mask of horrified fascination. "Wait, listen." He was holding his digital audio recorder, which he had snatched off the table. He rewound the last few seconds of the recording and hit play. First, we heard the sound of our own panicked movements, the rustle of our gear. Then, the deafening slam of the door. But immediately after the slam, captured in crystal clear audio, was another sound. It was a whisper, a child's ethereal voice, right next to the recorder's microphone. "Mine." We stared at each other, the color draining from our faces. "Sarah," I breathed. The word, her word, had been a declaration. This was her house. We were her playthings. Before we could process the EVP, my gaze was drawn to the corner of the room, to a small wooden rocking chair that had been sitting there, innocuous and unnoticed, since we arrived. It had been perfectly still. Now it was moving. It began with a slow, almost gentle sway. Back and forth, back and forth. The creak of the runners on the dusty floorboards was the only sound in the room. There was no draft, no vibration. It was moving with a deliberate, steady rhythm, as if an unseen occupant was sitting in it, rocking peacefully. Maya let out a small, strangled sob. "Make it stop," she pleaded. Ben, driven by some insane combination of terror and a documentarian's instinct, raised his camera and began filming, his hand shaking so badly the image was probably a blur. "I'm getting this," he muttered through clenched teeth. "I'm getting all of this." The rocking continued, steady and relentless. It was such a simple, mundane thing, yet in that context, it was the most terrifying thing I had ever witnessed. It was a display of power. A calm, confident demonstration that the laws of physics as we knew them no longer applied within these four walls. It was the entity showing us that it was in complete control. I felt a surge of anger mixed with my fear. "Who's there?" I yelled into the room, my voice cracking. "What do you want from us?" The only answer was the ceaseless, maddening creak, creak, creak of the rocking chair, and the suffocating pressure of an unseen intelligence watching us, enjoying our terror. The house was no longer just waiting. It was playing with us. The rocking chair became the focal point of our terror. Its gentle, rhythmic motion was a maddening counterpoint to the frantic chaos erupting in our minds. We were cornered animals, trapped in a cage with a predator that was taking its time, savoring the hunt. "We have to get out," Maya repeated, her voice rising with hysteria. "Liam, we have to break down the front door if we have to." But my eyes were fixed on the dark, closed door to the staircase. The slam, the EVP, the chair, it all felt like a performance, a deliberate escalation designed to drive us mad with fear. But what was upstairs? What was Silas so afraid of that he had sealed in the walls? The diary said the shadow was in the house, that it had taken his family. Was it still up there? The thought of leaving, of turning our backs on that closed door and running into the woods was terrifying. The diary had also mentioned the thing in the trees, the feeling of being watched. What if the house wasn't the cage, but the only shelter from something worse outside? We were trapped between two impossible choices. Stay in the malevolent heart of the haunting, or flee into its hunting grounds under the cloak of darkness. Night was falling again, the gray light outside the windows already turning a deep, bruised purple. The thought of another night in this place was unbearable. "We wait for morning," I said, the decision tasting like ash in my mouth. "We can't risk the woods in the dark. It's suicide. We'll barricade the doors and wait for sunrise." Ben and Maya didn't argue. The terror of the known, for the moment, seemed preferable to the terror of the unknown. We worked with a feverish energy born of dread. We dragged the heavy wooden table and wedged it against the front door. We piled the 3 chairs on top of it, a flimsy but psychologically comforting barrier. Then we turned our attention to the staircase door. It was solid wood, but the lock was a simple iron latch. It felt horribly insufficient. We looked around for something, anything, to reinforce it. The only thing heavy enough was the cot frame against the back wall. Working together, we wrestled the broken frame across the room and propped it diagonally against the door, wedging it under the door handle and against the floor. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. With our pathetic fortifications in place, we retreated to the center of the room, our backs to the cold hearth facing the 2 barricaded doors. We had created our own prison cell. The rocking chair had finally stopped moving, sitting still and silent in its corner, its presence somehow more menacing in its stillness. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. We sat in near total silence, listening. The wind had died down, and the woods outside were unnervingly quiet. The only sounds were our own ragged breaths and the frantic pounding of our hearts. The cabin grew cold again, the same unnatural chill from the night before seeping into our bones. And then the sounds from upstairs began. It started as a soft thud. We all flinched, our eyes locking on the ceiling. Another thud, this one heavier. Then a slow, dragging sound, like a heavy sack of grain being pulled across the floorboards. It moved from the far side of the loft, directly over our heads, towards the top of the staircase. My mind reeled. What could make a sound like that? It was too heavy, too uneven for a person. It sounded wet, somehow. Thump, drag, thump, drag. The sound was agonizingly slow, deliberate. The entity wasn't just moving, it was announcing its presence, letting us track its progress towards the barricaded door. It was a form of psychological torture, and it was working. I could feel my sanity fraying with each horrific sound. Maya had her hands clamped over her ears, her eyes squeezed shut, rocking back and forth slightly. Ben was filming the ceiling, his camera held in a white-knuckled grip, his breathing coming in short, sharp gasps. The dragging stopped directly above the staircase door. The silence that followed was somehow worse, pregnant with dreadful anticipation. We were all staring at our flimsy barricade, at the cot frame propped against the door. Suddenly, a deafening crack echoed from above, followed by the sound of splintering wood and something heavy crashing to the floor. It sounded like a piece of furniture had been thrown against a wall with immense force. It had come from the area the diary implicitly identified as Sarah's room. Then, a total, absolute, profound silence. It was the silence of a predator that has finished its display and is now simply waiting. Waiting for its terrified prey to make a move. We didn't know what had made the noise, but we knew one thing for certain. It was upstairs. It was awake. And it was angry. The silence after the crash was a living thing. It pressed in on us, heavy and suffocating, filled with the echoes of splintering wood and our own terrified thoughts. We remained frozen for what felt like an hour, a tableau of fear, our eyes glued to the barricaded staircase door. The entity had made its move, a violent display of power from the floor above. Now it was waiting for our response. It was Ben who finally broke the spell. His face was a pale, sweat-sheened mask in the lantern light, but his eyes held a feverish, almost manic gleam. "We have to go up there," he whispered, his voice trembling but resolute. Maya stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Are you insane? Did you not hear that? It will kill us." "This is why we're here," he shot back, his whisper rising in intensity. "This is the proof. The world needs to see this. We can't cower down here and wait for it to come to us. We have to document it." He was right, in a terrifying way. We were echo explorers. This was the echo we had been searching for our entire lives, a full-throated scream from the other side. Hiding felt like a betrayal of everything we claimed to be. But the thought of confronting whatever was up there, the shadow in the walls that Silas wrote of, was paralyzing. I was torn. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to stay put, to wait for the slim chance of sunrise. But another part, the part that had read Silas's diary, felt a strange pull of responsibility. We had unearthed his family story. Maybe we were meant to face what he couldn't. "He's right," I said, my own voice sounding foreign to me. "We have to see. We have to get it on camera." Maya looked from Ben to me, her expression one of utter betrayal and horror. "You're choosing the story over our lives." "Maybe they're the same thing now," I replied grimly. The decision was made. With agonizing slowness, we began to dismantle our barricade. Each scrape of the cot frame against the wooden door sounded like a thunderclap in the silent cabin. My hand shook as I finally reached for the iron latch. It was cold, unnaturally so, like a piece of ice. I lifted it, the click echoing in the stillness, and pulled the door open. A wave of cold air, far colder than the rest of the cabin, washed over us from the stairwell. It carried a faint, foul odor, like spoiled meat and damp earth. The darkness at the top of the stairs was absolute, a solid wall of black. Ben went first, camera raised, its night vision casting the world in an eerie green glow. I followed close behind with our most powerful flashlight, and Maya, armed with a heavy iron poker from the hearth, brought up the rear, her face set in grim resignation. Each step on the old wooden stairs produced a piercing creak that seemed to announce our ascent to the entire forest. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a painful reminder of my own fragile mortality. The air grew colder with each step we took, the foul smell intensifying. When we reached the top, we found ourselves in a small, open loft area. A single door on the far wall was ajar, hanging crookedly on a broken hinge. This had to be Sarah's room, the source of the crash. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a scene of utter chaos. The room was tiny, with a steeply slanted ceiling. A small, rotted bed frame lay in pieces against one wall. Child's drawings, faded and nightmarish scribbles of a tall, dark figure were still tacked to the wood. But the most jarring sight was the window. It was shattered, glass littering the floor, and the wooden frame itself was splintered outwards, as if something had been thrown through it from inside the room. And then my light found the corner, the deepest, darkest corner of the room, where the roof met the floor. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but it was too dark. It was a patch of blackness that seemed to drink the light from my flashlight, a hole in the fabric of reality. It began to coalesce, to pull itself together from the corners and the floor, rising like a column of black smoke. It had the vague, shifting shape of a man, but it was impossibly tall, its head brushing the slanted ceiling. It had no face, no features, just a roiling, endless void. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards, a sound that I felt in my bones more than heard with my ears. A wave of pure, undiluted malevolence washed over us, a feeling of ancient hatred and bottomless hunger. This was the shadow. This was the whispering man. As we stood there, paralyzed by a terror beyond anything I could have imagined, the thing slowly turned its formless head towards us. Within the shifting darkness, 2 pinpricks of faint crimson light ignited, like distant, dying embers. They were eyes, and they were filled with a cold, hateful intelligence. The humming intensified into a low, guttural hiss that seemed to rip through the air. And then, with a speed that defied its size, the column of darkness lunged towards us. There was no thought, no decision-making process. There was only the primal, instinctual shriek of every nerve in my body demanding flight. The lunge of the shadow thing shattered our paralysis, and we turned and fled in a single, unified moment of pure animal panic. I remember tumbling, not running, down the steep staircase. My feet barely touched the steps. I hit the ground floor hard, my shoulder slamming into the wall, the pain a distant, unimportant fact. Ben was right behind me, his camera still clutched in his hand, a testament to his insane dedication. Maya screamed, a raw, piercing sound of absolute terror that was cut short as she scrambled past me. We didn't even look at our pathetic barricade by the front door. We swarmed it, throwing the table and chairs aside with adrenaline-fueled strength. I wrenched the door open, and we burst out of the cabin into the freezing, pitch-black night. The cold air was a shock to the system, but it was infinitely better than the tomb-like chill of the cabin. We ran. We ran blindly, with no sense of direction, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces and arms, tearing at our clothes. The only goal was to put distance between ourselves and that horrifying structure. Behind us, we heard a sound that would haunt my nightmares forever. The front wall of the cabin splintered outwards with a deafening crack, as if the creature, too large or too impatient for the door, had simply walked through it. Then came the sound of its pursuit. It wasn't footsteps. It was the sound of the forest itself being torn apart. The snapping of thick branches, the crashing of saplings, the sound of immense, impossible weight moving through the dense woods at an unnatural speed. It was gaining on us. "Don't look back!" I screamed, though I don't know if the words even made it past my own lips. The terror escalated when the mimicry began. "Liam!" The voice that called my name was a grotesque parody of Maya's. It was distorted, layered with a wet, gurgling undertone, as if it were being spoken through water. Maya shrieked from somewhere ahead of me. "It's not me!" The thing was toying with us, using our names, our voices, to sow confusion and break our spirits. It crashed through the brush to our right, then to our left, flanking us, hurting us. We were no longer fleeing. We were being hunted for sport. I stumbled on a root, my ankle twisting painfully as I fell hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. For a second, I lay there, gasping, certain it was over. The crashing sound was deafeningly close. I could feel the ground vibrating with its approach. But then Ben was there, hauling me to my feet. "Go! Go now!" he yelled, shoving me forward. We ran on, fueled by nothing but sheer terror. My lungs burned, my legs were numb, my body was a mass of cuts and bruises, but we kept moving. The woods were a nightmare maze of identical, menacing trees. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into the shape of the creature. The gurgling, mimicking voices called to us from all directions. We were hopelessly lost, running in circles for all I knew. Just as my body was about to give out completely, as I felt the last of my strength failing, I saw a change in the darkness ahead. The impenetrable wall of black was thinning, resolving into the familiar shapes of trees. Through a gap, I saw a faint, pale glow. Dawn. And with it, the distant, beautiful sound of a truck engine rumbling down a paved road. With a final, desperate burst of energy, we scrambled up a short embankment and burst through the tree line, tumbling onto the cracked asphalt of a two-lane road. We had made it. We stood there, gasping for air, bleeding and battered, looking like madmen. A pair of headlights cut through the pre-dawn gloom, and an old logging truck slowed to a stop. The driver, a grizzled man in his 60s, stared at us with wide, disbelieving eyes. "My God, kids, what happened to you?" "Bear?" We just shook our heads, unable to form words. He let us climb into his cab without another question, the warmth of the heater a shocking, welcome sensation. As the truck pulled away, I turned and looked back at the forest. The woods stood silent and dark, a solid, unmoving wall under the first gray light of day. It looked perfectly normal, peaceful even. But I knew what was in there. The footage on Ben's camera, assuming it survived, would be our proof. But it would never capture the feeling of pure evil, the soul-deep cold, or the certainty that we had stumbled upon something ancient and terrible that had been left alone for a reason. We had escaped the cabin, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me more than the night air that we would never truly be free of it.